Hello, and welcome to another episode of Casual Learning. I'm your host, John Bannan. What's the deal with advice? Advice. Advice is a very important subject. Uh, it can have profound effects on your life. You take bad advice, and it can do terrible damage to you and maybe your loved ones for a short term or maybe even a very long term, even decades. Uh, Bad advice can be extremely, extremely costly, even to the ultimate price. Say you talk to a doctor and the doctor recommends that you have brain surgery. So you take his advice, you undergo brain surgery, and you die on the table. That happens. That's really bad advice. And there was no coming back from that. You're done. So bad advice can be extremely, extremely damaging. Um, and on the other hand, good advice can be a wonderful thing. It can let you do or achieve goals that you would never have achieved otherwise. It could improve your life immensely if you are getting advice from somebody who knows what they're talking about, getting good advice. Uh, you know, Lots of times there's information or secrets out there to success, whatever it is, the success that you're seeking, that are only known by certain people, and you won't even find them in books or in self-help videos or tapes or something like that. You actually they're secrets. They're really only held in the minds of certain people who happen to know this thing. And so sometimes those secrets, you'll only find out about them if you ask the right person. Um, a lot of, I would say, if you got a book, for instance, on some sort of do-it-yourself issue, I would say, generally speaking, you might find out about 75% of what you need to know. But there's always that 25% that nobody seems to put down in a book or in a magazine or on the internet or wherever you look for it in printed format. But really is very important to know, and it's these secrets that people keep in their heads, and they don't tell other people generally about the secrets, because it's one of the things that makes them special or allows them to make money and somebody else doesn't make a penny, so they keep it to themselves. They're very selfish like that. But there usually is some trade secrets too that are only that only the people involved know about them. And they can be very, very valuable if you find out about them. But people are often very stingy with that sort of advice. So advice is very, very important. Um, but this is true. No advice is better than bad advice. You're better off having no advice at all than taking bad advice. So be very, very careful who you take advice from. You're better off not taking bad advice. You're better off not knowing than taking bad advice. So when you take advice from somebody, be very, very careful whether you follow that advice or not. And, make sure that it's good advice that you're following, not bad advice. Uh, People in general just love to give other people advice. They just don't seem to be able to keep their noses out of other people's business. So they'll even give you unsolicited advice, let alone if you asked them for it. But generally, people don't know what they're talking about. But they love to give advice on every topic under the sun. They have their opinion about everything. And of course, they think their opinion is correct and that you should, of course, follow their opinion. But trust me, there are very few people who can actually give you good advice. Few people. Most of the people give you unsolicited bad advice. Bad advice. So, if you're listening to these people, take whatever they say with a grain of salt. Another good saying is this: trust but verify. Because people don't know what they're talking about most of the time. So you can trust them, listen to them, what they have to say, what their advice is, but verify that what they're saying is true. Because 9 times out of 10, people don't know what they're talking about, and they can just give you bad advice. They don't think it's bad advice, but it is. It's bad advice. So, take their advice with a grain of salt. Be very careful. Verify that what they say is true if you can. Another good thing you could do is, get advice from multiple people, not just advice from one person, multiple people. What do they all have to say about it? Now, they could all be wrong, but that'll help you understand the issue better. And, one thing you got to understand is, generally speaking, for most decisions in life, even important decisions, there aren't clear answers. There's always some doubt, some gray area, something to think about and consider. Almost always. There's always a gray area. You don't want to get caught up into not making any decisions at all. What some people call paralysis by analysis. You have to decide. Successful people make decisions based on their best, a reasonable understanding of the situation. They don't just not make decisions because they don't want to decide. You have to decide. If you want to be a successful person, you have to make decisions. Some of those decisions are going to be wrong. But you think about them and you try to make the best decision you can. So that often involves advice. I would not be the sort of person who simply takes other people's advice and abdicates any role that you might play in deciding what is best for you. You know what's best for you. You know what your goals are. You know what kind of person you are, what you like, what you're seeking. Nobody knows that better than you. So ultimately, you should be the one deciding for yourself. You shouldn't be just advocating that decision making to somebody else that you're taking advice for. Those people, they're not that concerned with you and your life, and they don't understand your life and all the circumstances involved in your life and all the details and factors that have to be considered. They don't know any of these things. They may give you some advice and they thought about it for like a minute. And they thought, okay, well, there you go, that's my advice. It took me about a minute to think about it. Whereas with you really should be thinking about it for hours or days or weeks or even months before you decide something especially important. So they may have given very little thought to it. Now, that doesn't mean the advice is bad, but just remember, they're concerned about themselves. They're not concerned about you. Now, it's true, generally speaking, that about 90% of the people don't care about your problems. And the remaining 10%, they're glad you have your problems. So keep that in mind. That people are not focused on you. They're not focused on your life, your goals, your problems. They're focused on their own problems. So their advice is going to be not well considered. It still may be good advice depending on who the person is that's giving it to you. But just remember, nobody knows you better than you. Don't give up your own responsibility for making decisions for yourself. You can certainly seek advice, and seek good advice would be a great idea. Um, but ultimately, it's your responsibility, and you need to know, you need to decide. You know what's best for you. You know, there's a lot of people who think that they know exactly what you should do, and they'll tell you that, and and you wonder, where these people get their their arrogance in thinking they know how to direct other people's lives. And some of these people, their lives are a car wreck, and you wonder, well, why are you so sure this is what I should do? You can't even do things well on your own, and you're giving me advice, or you're telling me I should do this. There's lots of people like that, and just be polite, listen to what they have to say, consider it, and then ultimately you're going to reject it probably. That's fine. A lot of these people, it boggles my mind how they can just throw out advice that can profoundly affect your life if you follow it so willy-nilly and without much thought, and be completely wrong about what they're talking about. So be very, very careful of that sort of person. One thing you can do is look at the person's life. Somebody's giving you advice, and it's like, well, okay, have you succeeded in your life? Did you follow what it is you're telling me to do? What were the consequences? What happened to you? Is your life a disaster? Well, maybe I shouldn't be taking advice from you. You shouldn't be taking marital advice from a guy who's been divorced 3 times. And that principle, applies into all different subject areas. Look at the person's life, and do they make good decisions? Do they know what they're talking about? Do they follow a lifestyle that you agree with, that you like? They may not. You may not like their lifestyle at all. So then, why would you listen to them? That's right, because it's just going to lead to what they've become. Well, if you don't like what they've become, then you probably shouldn't be taking advice from this person. And then, the opposite holds true. If you like this person's life, the way they handle themselves, what they've accomplished, if that's what you would like to do, then maybe you should take this person's advice, because it looks like they know how to get what they accomplished. And if that's what you want, then maybe you should take their advice or ask for their advice. Another thing with advice is a lot of people who should be giving you advice don't. They just, whoop, they won't talk. And it's very selfish of them, but they won't tell you. There's some people that should tell you stuff that just don't. For whatever reason, they don't care. Usually it's because they don't care. Or maybe they don't want to interfere with somebody else's business or life. Or maybe they just don't comprehend that they should be giving you advice or telling you things that you need to know. Maybe they assume you know something and you really don't. But some people seem to operate that way. Some people seem to operate under the principle that it's up to you to ask me questions. Otherwise, I'm not saying anything. If you ask me questions, then I'll tell you stuff. But if you don't ask me questions, forget it. You're not getting anything out of me. There's just some people like that. So if you want their advice, you better ask them questions, because otherwise they're not telling you anything. Then there's some people who will freely offer you advice. Some people like to teach, and you don't have to ask them questions, and they'll just keep telling you all sorts of things. Very depending on the person, it could be very valuable things that they're teaching you, or depending on the person and whether they know anything, or it could be really bad things that they're teaching you. But that's a different sort of personality. They're much more generous with their time and with their knowledge, and they don't expect you to ask questions. So it depends. You got to figure out what kind of person am I dealing with. Do I have to ask all the questions to get information from this person, or is this the kind of person who's just gonna, all I really do is just sort of chat with them a little bit, and they're just gonna, like a floodgate of information, flood of information is gonna come out of them, and I'm gonna listen and learn a lot of things. Different types of personalities. Personally, I don't like the person who makes you ask them questions. I think if they cared, they would be telling you things that you should know and not expecting you to ask them questions. But you'll run into that sort of personality, very tight-lipped, and you got to ask them. Now, when you're taking advice from somebody, it's really important to know about salespeople. There's different reasons why people would be willing to give you advice. Maybe the person likes to teach, and hopefully they know what they're talking about. That sort of person just does it out of the kindness of their heart. They like to teach people things. Maybe this is somebody who has a responsibility towards you and should be giving you advice because of that responsibility. Maybe this is a paid consultant. Maybe you're paying this person, an hourly rate to give you advice, like an attorney, for instance, or any other sort of consultant or professional consultant. But then there's also the salesperson. And the salesperson will also give you advice. And it's generally the kind of advice everybody wants because it's free. People don't like to pay for advice. So be careful of the salesperson. There's an old saying, you get what you pay for. And that is true. And if you're not paying for this advice, then you got to wonder whether it's any good or not. It depends on who it's coming from. But lots of times free advice comes from salespeople. And salespeople are really just interested in selling you something, not in giving you actually good advice. So when you're getting advice from a salesperson, it's generally free because they want to hook you in so they can sell you something. It's generally bad advice. And all it really is about is selling you something. Okay. So, A lot of these investment advisors are really just salespeople. They're trying to sell you their supposed investments. Whatever it is they're selling. But they act as if they're an investment advisor and that they can advise you about your retirement and how to make a lot of money. Well, the truth is they're only trying to sell you something. They're trying to make money for themselves. And then they're giving you bad advice. Probably giving you bad advice. But because it's free and they sort of present themselves as an expert, you believe it. But you're getting snookered. It's bad advice. So ask yourself when somebody's giving you advice, are they trying to sell me something? Because if they're trying to sell you something, chances are their advice is going to be bad. Because their motivation isn't to see that you get good advice and your life gets better. Their motivation is to sell you something so that they can get a commission. Understand that. Salespeople hook you in, generally by lying to you. Salespeople are massive liars. Lies. They tell you what you want to hear. They're often very good at figuring out what you want to hear and what you want, and then telling you lies to make you think that you're getting those things. And then they make their sale. But understand they're lying to you. Salespeople are tremendous liars. And they're very skilled liars. You may not even know you're getting lied to. But that's what they generally do. They tell you what you want to hear, not the truth. Because one thing is the truth may upset you, and then they lose their sale because they upset you. So the salespeople are often trying to manipulate your emotions to get a sale instead of telling you the truth. So they'll tell you things that make you feel good, and those could be complete lies. But they make you feel good, and then you get closer to the sale. The last thing the salesperson really wants to do is make you feel bad, because then you'll leave. But if you're getting good advice might very well make you feel bad, because that's the truth. And it's not a nice truth. It's a truth that makes you feel bad, but it's good advice. Not, depending on depending on how you feel about the advice, whether it's good or whether it makes you feel bad, that doesn't determine whether the advice is actually truthful or good for you or not. Advice may feel great. Good advice may feel great, but good advice may also feel bad. It could be either way. It's still good advice, but salespeople, they're not going to try to make you feel bad. So watch out for a lot of bad advice from those people. Paid professionals, consultants should be giving you much closer to the truth. And some of that advice you may not like and it may feel bad, but it's probably good advice, depending on the person. But be careful of the salesperson. Very careful. These people are great at hiding the fact that they're lying to you, so that you never suspect a thing. Another thing you got to be careful about is the first-time expert. Oftentimes, if we don't know something about something, the first person who tells us about this subject, we define them as an expert because we don't know anything about it, and we're like, well, this person knows something about it. So now in our mind, they're an expert on the subject. Well, it doesn't necessarily mean they're an expert. It just means that you didn't know anything about it, but they did know something about it, or at least they seem to know something about it. It doesn't necessarily make them an expert, so be careful about that. We tend to, hold up people who first tell us things on high pedestal. We think a lot of them. We think, well, this person was this expert who enlightened me about this area, and they're great and they know everything. Be careful of that trap. It's very unlikely they know everything. And there may be limits to what they know, and that a lot of other people know a lot more than they do. Or it may be that this person is actually a salesperson, and you put them on a high pedestal when they were really just selling you something, and that was it. And they were lying to you to boot. So be careful of that sort of initial impression we get of people, giving them the idea that they're in our heads some sort of expert. Be careful of doing that. Take things with a grain of salt, especially when you're new to an area. When you never heard of something before and you don't know much about it, chances are there's going to be a lot more to learn about it than just from one person, the first person who introduces you to some knowledge about that thing. It doesn't make him an expert. It just makes him the first person who's telling you something about a subject you didn't otherwise know anything about. Now, that's where the education may begin. Um, when you go to take advice, you really should know um, a lot about the subject already. Because how else are you going to tell whether the advice is good or not? If you know nothing about the subject matter at all, and you're just taking this person's advice, then you're rolling the dice. You don't know whether this advice is good or not. You have no way of judging it yourself. So you're rolling the dice. And it may be bad advice, and it may cost you dearly. This is one of the reasons people get second opinions on, medical procedures and from doctors, because they don't know anything about the procedure or the condition that they have, and there's no basis for which that they can decide that question. Does the doctor know what he's talking about? Is he right? So they ask another doctor. You get more people involved. At least you ask two people who supposedly know what they're talking about. That increases your odds that the advice is good and not bad. But you should also know something about yourself. The more you know about it yourself, the better you're going to be able to judge the merit of the advice, whether this is good advice or whether this is bad advice. Most advice that people give you is bad advice. All right? So when people give you advice, nine times out of 10, it's bad advice. Okay? So be very wary of taking somebody's advice. So you got to know something about the subject area so that you can gauge whether this is good advice or not. Most of the time, it's bad advice. Be very careful. Most of the time, you're better off doing nothing than simply taking this person's advice. But occasionally, you do get good advice, and good advice can be absolutely critical to your success. No doubt about it, because you don't know the secrets that some other person knows that are fundamentally important to understand in order to succeed. That happens a lot. But sometimes it's like looking for a needle in a haystack, looking for that person who knows the golden secret to success in this particular area. And then you're going to hear a bunch of nonsense from a lot of other people. But you keep looking and maybe you stumble upon it. Maybe you don't. Maybe you never do. That can happen. How do you determine, whether advice is good or not? One of the things you can look at is what's the background of this person who's giving me this advice? Do I have reason to believe that they know what they're talking about? So look at the person. Do they have qualifications? Do they have degrees? Do they have certifications that would prove that this person has been trained in this and probably does know what they're talking about? What kind of experience does this person have? How long have they been in this? How successful have they been? If the person's been successful, then and whatever their success is something that you're looking to do, then that may be the very person you want to talk to, because they may know how to get the success that you want. Now, some people stumble on their success, or their success is due to some other factor that you're not aware of, and you presume it's something else, which it really isn't. That happens too. So this isn't always clear, but it's an indication that someone may know what they're talking about. Um, so one mistake you can make is just say, "Well, I trust this person, therefore I'm taking their advice." People can be, trustworthy or honest, maybe, somebody close to you. But that doesn't mean that they know what they're talking about, or they should be giving you advice on this particular topic. It might be terrible advice. You might love this person or have, really trust this person. But that doesn't mean that they know what they're talking about on this particular topic. It depends on the topic, really. But be careful. Just because you trust somebody doesn't necessarily mean that advice is going to be good. That advice could be horrible that they're giving you. And then you suffer the consequences for it if you take it. People, if you're giving people advice, give them advice on things you know something about. And if you don't know something about it, admit you don't know something about it. There's no shame in admitting that you don't know something. In fact, it really indicates that you're honest and that you probably have a better appreciation for the complexity of things and issues if you admit you don't know something, than if you just pretend as if you know everything. Salespeople are often the sorts of people who just pretend they know everything. Every question you could possibly ask, they're going to know the answer to. Well, that's humanly impossible. So if you're dealing with one of those people, there's a good indication there that this person is probably not to be believed. So if you're giving advice, be careful. Give advice on things you know about, and always and be aware that you give somebody advice and they follow it, and it goes south on them and it blows up in their face. They're going to blame you. And rightly so. You're the one that gave them the advice. So be careful. Be careful about giving advice. I'm not saying you shouldn't give advice, but know what you're talking about when you give advice, and be upfront and honest about it. Don't sugarcoat it or lie to people because you know what they want to hear, so you're going to tell it to them. That's bad advice. If you're dealing with somebody who just wants to hear, a certain answer, certain preconceived answer that they have, they just want a confirmation that they're correct. If you're dealing with one of those, ignoramuses, you're in trouble, because you tell them the truth, and then they're going to get mad at you, and there might be consequences for that. But you really got to ask yourself, do you really want to be dealing with this sort of person who just wants to be told? They just want a yes man. Just tell me whatever it is I want to hear. Tell me that. There are some people like that. And those people are fools. And you might be a fool for dealing with them. So think about that. All right. There's an old saying that experience makes you wiser. I'm sure you've heard this, right? Experience makes you wiser. Well, this is false. False. Not true. Experience makes you more experienced. Doesn't necessarily make you wiser. You could have 40 years of experience, but really only 1 year of experience repeated 40 years in a row. So the key to this is wiser. So just living longer than somebody else does not make you wiser. It makes you more experienced, but not necessarily wiser. There are just as many old people who are stupid as there are young people who are stupid or fools. It's true. Plenty of old people don't know what they're talking about, or older people don't know what they're talking about. Just as many younger people don't know what they're talking about. So experience, it just makes you more experienced. It doesn't make you wiser. So, don't fall for that trap. Well, just because this person is, ancient, they know everything, or that they're wiser. Not true. Not true. I've met plenty of older people who don't know what they're talking about at all. And in fact are very foolish and make terrible mistakes, and you would never want to take their advice. So understand that. There's a difference between experience and wisdom. Wisdom is somebody who thinks, somebody who understands consequences and cause and effect, and understands the complexity of issues and what it is that you want and where you're going, what your goals are, and understands the subject area very, very well, deeply, and understands that there's always a gray area in decision making. Those are the sorts of people you want to take advice from. Wise people, not just experienced people. Now, you could have a lot of experience, and that could add to your ability to be wise because you know more, and if you're thinking, it could make you wiser. But generally speaking, it's just experience. It's not necessarily wisdom. Two different things entirely. And I guess on the flip side, just because somebody's young doesn't necessarily mean that they can't give you good advice. Depends on the area, the topic. They may know a lot about it, actually. Maybe they have, advanced degrees in it, and they actually do know a lot about it, a lot more than you do, and maybe they are capable of giving you good advice. So don't discriminate against somebody just because they're younger. They may very well be capable of giving you good advice. There was the idea of consulting an expert. An expert is somebody through their knowledge, training, skill, and experience is supposed to know this matter, this subject matter in great detail. So, consulting experts can be useful in trying to get good advice, absolutely. But I can tell you, experts disagree among themselves. And for every expert who says one thing, there's another expert who will say just the opposite. So even the experts can't agree among themselves on what is the proper thing to do. That happens a lot. So then it often becomes, well, which expert is more believable? Which one, seems to be making more sense? And there usually is one who seems more believable and makes more sense than the other one. So you can decide that way. But, consulting experts is a good idea, but just remember that experts can go on either side of an issue very easily. And even their advice may not be good advice, or it may not be solid advice. It's entirely possible. Even if you paid this person, that's entirely possible too. That's why consulting multiple experts is a good idea. People who don't have an incentive to simply agree with you, they're good to talk to. You're paying them a fee. I'm giving you a certain hourly rate. Tell me what you think. Tell me the truth. Okay. That sort of person may just give you the straight shoot, the straight truth about something, a straight shooter. And that can be very valuable. That could be good advice. So always remember, what is this person's incentive to give me advice? Do they want to please me? If they want to please you, then maybe their advice isn't going to be very good because they're withholding something. They're not telling you the straight truth because they know there's something you don't want to hear. So think about that. Some people they may know something about the subject, and they may be able to give you good advice up to a certain limit, right? There's if this is the total amount that you can know about the subject. They may be at this level. That may be the limit to their knowledge, and you may be down here. So you could use all this knowledge, and it's very useful to you. But at some point, maybe you've reached that level, and they can't help you anymore because they're not up here. And so now you got to talk to somebody else to get up there. So understand that people have limits with what they know. And the question you ask, it could be very general, something that they're quite capable of answering well, or it could be very, very specific and complicated, and maybe it's even beyond them, and you got to talk to somebody else, get your advice from somebody else, or dig up more information so that you understand it better. But people have their limits, so be aware of people's limits. And in the subject matter, you may know this great car mechanic who knows everything about cars, and you'll take his advice when you have a problem with your car. But that doesn't mean you should take his advice on, medical issues. I got this pain in the side, man. What do you think that is? He's a great car mechanic, but he doesn't know anything about medicine. You shouldn't be asking him questions like that or taking his advice or on any other subject matter that he doesn't know anything about. So just because they're an expert in one area doesn't mean that they're an expert in everything else. In fact, they're probably not. Somebody who knows a lot about a lot of things. Those are pretty rare people. Maybe you're lucky enough to know some of them, some people like that. But most people don't know a lot about a lot of different things. They might know a lot about one particular thing, and you ask about that may be the limit to what you're going to get out of them in terms of good advice. I'm a fan of cliches, words of wisdom, rules of thumb. They're generalities, but there's usually some good reason behind them. And I often catch myself spouting out some cliche or some rule of wisdom in deciding something. And I have a bunch of them, dozens of them memorized, and they help me out because they're generally good rules of thumb. They do contain wisdom, and you can usually rely on them for being true, and it can be very helpful. So don't poo-poo cliches and old world words of wisdom. They can be very useful, very easy things to remember. They can help guide you. And give you good advice. So I like those things. I find them helpful. Another thing is people can be very superficial. They can look at somebody, look at their appearance, how they're dressed, whether they wear a gold watch or not, what kind of car they drive, how they speak, how they look, what their appearance is, and then completely miss the fact that this person is an idiot and they don't know what they're talking about. Happens all the time. And salespeople often do this. They want to give the appearance that, they're successful, and therefore you jump to the conclusion that they must know what they're talking about. Well, they're doing that on purpose. It's a manipulation. They may have no money in their bank account because they spent it all on their car payment just to impress you so they can sell you something. So be very, very careful about appearances. Don't judge a book by its cover. See, there's an old cliche. It's got a lot of wisdom in it. Don't judge a book by its cover. Don't judge whether somebody is capable of giving you good advice by their appearance alone. Now, their appearance can tell you certain things, but it's not going to be able to tell you the entire story. And you can easily jump to the wrong conclusion that this person knows what they're talking about if their appearance is very flashy. A lot of really smart people aren't flashy at all because they're not trying to sell you something. They don't care. They want to, look or appear comfortable. They don't care. So you may make the wrong judgment about them and think that they don't know what they're talking about, and you'd be completely wrong. That happens all the time. So don't judge a book by the cover. Judge them by the way I've told you. What is their life like? What do they know? Do they have degrees in things? What am I asking about? Is this something that they're an expert in? Is this person trying to sell me something? Do they have some other reason to give me advice? Some agenda, personal agenda? Ask yourself these questions. And then ultimately, you really have to decide on your own. Does it make sense to you? Hopefully you know something about the subject area where it can make some sense to you, and then you can decide on your own because you know yourself best. There's a lot of people who have opinions, but very few people know what they're talking about. And that's true. So be very careful who you take advice from. All right. So that's it on advice. Advice can be very, very important and very, very useful, and it can really help you out in life. But it could also destroy your life if you take bad advice or cause you big problems. So be very careful who you take advice from, and ultimately make your own decision because only you know yourself. All right. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. Please press the subscribe button because I'm sure you like this. And that's my advice for you. And take care, everybody. Bye.